Hello, everybody. How are you today? We are broadcasting live from Miami. Today is Wednesday, May 13 of 2020. Today, we're going to speak about three articles. We're going to explore them. One of them speaks about the Latin American makers scrambling to stem losses as brands scrap orders. The other one is the art of the crisis pivot and the brands that are getting it right. And our last article will be Sarah's billionaire owner was praised for helping in the coronavirus crisis. Workers in Myanmar are paying the price. So to give a little bit of a background, we're going to start with the first article speaking about how in Latin America they're struggling with canceled orders. We spoke about this in length in the past few episodes because in Bangladesh the crisis is very big. We know that they have the textile industry there is very big. Of course, they're taking a hit with all these canceled orders, not only in Bangladesh but also in many countries in Asia. And now we're going to explore Latin America. So the textile industry constitutes one of the oldest productive activities in Latin America. Even before the colonization, the pre-Hispanic textile, and during the pre-Hispanic times, the textile production was very, very important, and it continued to be during the colonial rule. And throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, the importance of the sector did not decrease. During the stage of the industrial growth that was induced by exports, the textile branch led the sectoral growth in Brazil and Mexico, which are the two of the largest economies in the region. So, we're going to speak about Latin America and the brands that are the brands that are canceling, right? And how in different countries this situation is affected, because on the surface it would look like the crisis is kind of similar, or the actions taken by brands and factories is kind of similar, but each country has a different way of handling this, and of course each country has a different economy and different circumstances, so this situation is very complex and very different from country to country. So, as Latin American textile and apparel makers are struggling because US and the European fashion brands are canceling or postpone orders due to the coronavirus, the industry is slowing down all over the world. So, the vice president of the Mexico-based Cavalier Fashion Group, Eric Levy, said that they are in a critical situation. This group produces jackets, luxury items, and they import from brands and they distribute important brands in Mexico of other luxury brands. So this supplier, the the Cavalier Fashion Group, they bring their products to Liverpool, El Palacio de Hierro, and Sears in Mexico, which are probably some of the biggest stores, department stores that sell in Mexico. But right now, obviously, as we all know, they are not open, so they're taking, they're throwing the firm into a cash squeeze because there are no sales. We know all this story. He says that they have lost around 2.5 million in revenues for part of March and all of April. And the situation in Mexico is peculiar because they're asking these companies are asking the government for deferment of tax payments, but in Mexico it's almost legendary that it's not a good practice, but it's almost legendary that industries don't pay taxes. So there's a little bit of a situation there because the government is not exempting or giving them more time. Also, remember, taxes are paid after sales, so if there are not sales made right now, there are no taxes to be paid. So it's a little bit of a complex situation. If you have something that we can explore deeper, please share with me so we can talk about it in a next broadcast. Also, he says that the industry is operating at a 20%, and they don't see how they can last longer because they're paying salaries to their workers even if they are at home. Also, I think that it's different from how things are in comparison to the United States. For example, is if an employer fires their employees in Mexico, the employees are entitled to protection from, and it states that there are laws that protect these employees, and those laws say that they have to be paid vacation or you know, it's a whole like it's 10 types of recovery payments that the employers have to take care of. So in a situation like this, the biggest problem for everybody is the cash flow. So if they fire all of these employees, they have to cover for all of these expenses, and you know, they don't have cash for that. So in Mexico, the situation is also peculiar because there's a lot of contraband and piratery. I don't know how to say it in English. It's when you create fake, for example, Louis Vuitton bags, but are not Louis Vuitton. So there's a lot of that type of market in Mexico, and also contraband. The contraband means that they buy for example, a company with 2 employees buys crazy amounts of denim from outside as contraband. They don't pay taxes for them. They don't employ people. It's a 2-people company. So this forces the industry in Mexico, you know, to not hire as many employees as it could hire if this denim or all these textiles were produced in Mexico. So this makes the industry even more weak in times like this, because all of these jobs could be in Mexico instead of being on the other side of the world. They're bringing textiles that are not of good quality. They're bringing products that are like, well, you know, we all know that made in China stuff that are fake. So this is a big issue in Mexico, and when a crisis hits like this, well, this is even bigger because a lot of employment cannot be done because of this situation. Some brands have offered to pay. As I said, in each country they're managing situations different. So we have that in Mexico, the Canaibe, which is they lobby for the garment workers and the whole industry. They say they're in a very precarious situation, and they're asking the government to change a few laws in order to help them to survive, right? I found that very interesting as I read all these articles and explored the different angles of how this situation is being handled, that all of these changes and all of these things that are happening in all over the world, you know, how from the top of the companies, all of these changes, right? All of this is tackled in such a different way in every country that I had the opportunity to explore. So in Mexico, for example, they are operating, some of these companies, they're operating at 20% because they also are employing people for to do, you know, the PPE things that are most needed right now. So we're gonna talk a little bit. Well, the formal industry in Mexico employs around 300,000 workers, and the informal employs around 1 million. So, in this informal employment is where all the contraband and all these illegal practices fit. So, this is so harmful for the industry because nothing can be traced, nothing can be put, into law, nothing can be really assessed and managed in a way that they can receive any help, in a way that they can really tackle a situation from a legal perspective, right? So Mexico is it's a country that most imports to the United States. Brazil also. So this is to see that how important it is the textile industry in so many countries, right? Mexico and Brazil are one of the two strongest economies, and because Mexico exports so much so much to other countries, especially the United States, they're in a super avid. This means that they send more than what they need to come into the country. So another area is Central America. They are suffering because a lot of orders have been canceled, and some purveyors, for example, that bring stuff to Under Armour, Nike, or Lululemon, they have closed. So some of them are operating only with just one shift, but in countries like Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, and Honduras, they completely shut the whole industry. So in Guatemala, it says that they have lost already 400 million in contracts. This is about 1.6 billion totally, in a complete year. So this is already been very hard for them, and probably will be even harder because we don't know when this is gonna end, right? This is changing, and this has not been the same, so it's hard to know. This has not been the same in the entire world, so it's really hard to know when things are gonna be back to a different normal, because we're not gonna go necessarily back to normal, but a different normal. And let's remember that all of these factories, they create garments for the United States, for example. That's one of the biggest buyers. And the United States is right now, struggling to come back to whatever normal that means. In Guatemala, this sector is the main sector, the exporter. That's the biggest exporter they do from the textile industry. They employ 280 companies. Obviously, this means they have a very, very strong working force, right? So, in Colombia, for example, Grupo Cristal, which provides to Chico, Zumba, and Michael Kors, they say they have 2 or 3 months of clothes that probably won't sell, but they're in a different position. This specific group says that they have cash flow to keep their employees and the company alive while all of this passes. So at least this specific Grupo Cristal in Medellin, Colombia, are in a little bit of a better position. In Brazil, Fernando Pimentel, which is the president of ABIT, it's the Brazilian Association of the Textile Industry, they stopped exporting because the need in Brazil for these articles of main necessity right now, which are the gowns and the masks and everything, their system, they shifted it. So they are producing now these things that are of a main need right now. So they're struggling also, changing their patterns and everything, but they're fixing they're shifting their system, their way. Okay, so they in Brazil, this is a very big industry too. They are self-sustainable in cotton, right? They produce their cotton. They do industrialize whatever they need. The industry is very important also in Brazil because they have huge factories. The size of their factories are remarkable. So, and they employ 1.5 million workers, and they make around 48.3 billion in US dollars as an income annually. There are different ways things are being handled. It says that in Paraguay, the industry, which is also one of the most important, the exporting of textiles, it's been hit because also clients in Brazil have stopped to make these commitments, to finalize these commitments. So countries like Uruguay, Chile, and Bolivia also stopped their give me one second. They also stopped paying, making cancellations and all these things. So one of the things that the companies are handling, for example, one of the ways companies are handling is that they're asking for deferral of payments. Instead of a 30-day payment, which was the original commitment, they are asking now for 90 days of deferral. In other cases, they are wanting to pay only for the fabric, right? Instead of the whole garment already finished. So, companies, the factories probably don't have much option but to comply to these terms because they need the cash flow, right? Some of the circumstances that happen also in Latin America, especially in Argentina and Brazil, is that the conditions of the workers are very precarious, like we spoke about Bangladesh. But in Bangladesh, the sweatshops, they exist all over the place, okay? Sweatshops where people is scrambled working in precarious sanitary conditions, a lot of hours during the day working, 6 days a week. But in these countries in Latin America, there's also the illegal treat of people. They bring people illegally to work as practically slaves. These people have to pay to their handlers because they brought them into the country to work. There's a lot of child labor, child slavery, and there's also a lot of mafia involved. So on this, we're going to explore a little bit more because the issue is not only happening on the other side of the world, but for some reason, we don't hear much about it here in Latin America. So I think it's important that we explore. And for this broadcast, I tried to find, and it's really not much out there, but a few old articles and videos, but not really much. As we haven't given attention to this as much as we have given to Bangladesh after the Rana Plaza incident that killed more than 1,000 people. A lot of attention was brought to there, but there's not a lot of attention to these circumstances in Latin America, and we need to find out what's going on.